Welcome to the Pasic Performance Group podcast. I am Tyler Pasic, and today we have Michael Locasto on the pod. So Mike here he was a strength conditioning coach for 8 years. I had him on a podcast. I'm not sure, maybe it was a week or two ago as well. He was a strength coach for 8 years. The last 4 of those were with the Arizona Diamondbacks as an assistant strength and conditioning coach. And now he is a high performance mindset coach. And today we are going to dive into words and how words matter. And, this is one topic that I continually talk about with a lot of people that have been on my podcast because they really do. Words affect every part of us. And the reason Mike and I are having this conversation is because over Instagram, he put up a post about good and bad and how nothing is good or bad. And then we got into it about labels and how our brains label things and whatnot. So without further ado, let's get into it. So thanks for being on, Mike. Appreciate you hopping on after that Instagram conversation we had.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm glad you reached out. It's, I think, an important topic for people to start diving into and start asking themselves questions of how they label things.
Mm-hmm. So, like, when you put up that post, do you have that post on you by any chance right now?
Yeah, let me look it up.
Because when you put it up, it initially hit me like, man, I love this because this is something that I talk about all the time. But then I started diving into my own thoughts around the topic, and I
Yeah,
even thought that it's a very difficult conversation to have with somebody else, but it's just as difficult to have that conversation with yourself.
oh man,
So do you have it with you right now?
I do. Yeah, it's right here.
So what is it exactly?
So the post was judgment is the death of growth. When we use words like good and bad, we teach our brain and body to attach meaning to the outcome. Detachment from judgment allows for a more intuitive process to learning. In this place, we can accept all outcomes. Deeper learning takes place here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I responded, I'm like, nothing is good or bad, it just is. If we don't label anything, how do we know what's what? What words should I use instead of good and bad? And we got into it a little bit, but like I think this is key because sometimes we attach words to, I mean, not sometimes, almost all the time, we attach words to ourselves and it becomes part of our identity. And it's being conscious and intentional with which words we are attaching to and which words mean stuff to us and noticing how certain words make us feel in the moment when we use them.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
like when you're working with an athlete, like what's one way you implement this kind of mindset shift with them, or do you have a story recently that maybe you've been working with somebody or noticed somebody saying something and you were like, okay, let's pause this moment right now and take a look back at what words you just used?
Yes. So commonly, I kind of stole this from you, but you talk about the importance of using questions to tap into people. And I speak about speaking to people's inner Buddha. So I have a question that I commonly use with people. It's, hey, tell me about your life in 3 years. What's going on? What does it look like? This is your ideal life. Sitting 3 years later down the road, what's going on? And people will be like, oh man, I will be doing this. I will be doing that. And I stop people. I'm like, no. You're living as though 3 years in advance, you're living as the life that you want to live. And people have a hard time, like truly being in that moment, like truly being in the place of like actually existing as if their future vision, their dreams are coming true. So I often speak to people and how they use words, and commonly you'll see people talk about shoulds or can'ts, and that shows up in a form of judgment and often limits people and what is possible. So it's a very it's a very individualized subject, but I think words first and foremost are programming for our subconscious, and subconscious makes up about, Joe Dispenza says, 95% of who we are when we're 35 years old. So we're already conditioned to understand labels like good and bad, but oftentimes it gets us into the result. Like we label the result as good and bad, and we attach onto the result as opposed to what occurs before the result, what gives us the result, and that's your preparation and your execution. So I kind of untether people and how they look into words and how they speak about themselves in that realm.
Hmm. So I like how you just said that it attaches us to the result instead of the process that goes into that result. And when you label the result as good or bad, that's kind of taking away from what you did to even get there in the first place. And so that's one thing that I talked about actually yesterday with one of my clients, and she was telling me a story, and then she goes, but that's just who I am.
Mm,
And I said, I kind of paused that moment, and I asked her, or I said to her that I didn't ask her, I just told her in this case, like sometimes if you say the words like that's just who I am, if you say that a lot and then you do something to that like unintentionally hurts somebody or causes emotional upset inside of them, and then you guys get into an argument or whatever it might be, and you just say this is who I am, it is a very fixed statement,
mm,
because it implies, I believe anyways, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this is like the power of words, when you say this is who I am, it is a fixed statement because it's implying that there will be no change in the future.
mm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Or do you want me to
yeah.
dive into that more?
No, like you, I mean, it sounds like you're speaking to identity. And I know
Hmm.
we touched on that a little bit on the last podcast, but what was her response to you?
She agreed, and because it does, I believe when you tell somebody this is just who I am, that means that you're implying that you're never going to change.
Mm,
So, like when you're very upfront and very forward with people, and you say things without thinking, and you don't care about the situation, or you aren't even empathizing with them when they maybe share something with you, and instead of empathizing with them, you just call them a name or something like that, or you say like, well, you're just being soft,
mm,
like something like that, and they're like, oh my gosh, like that was so mean, and you would say like, that's just who I am, like I'm going to be direct with you, I'm going to tell you what I think. And it's like, I mean, yeah, that's probably who you are, maybe in that moment, but when you say that, it implies that you're always going to be that way, and they should accept you for that. Meaning
mm.
that, like, they're not going to, there's nothing they can do that's going to change you, and they better get with it or get to moving. And that kind of shifts the accountability off of you and onto them. In my,
Yeah,
in my, in my, that's kind of how I saw it when you say statements like, this is who I am,
yeah,
or that's just who I am.
especially when you're like going into someone else's life and telling them they should act a certain way, and it's you just saying, like I'm just telling you what I think, but what you think is a judgment. So,
Ah, yeah, exactly. That's
you know,
exactly what I was trying to
so,
get at.
oh man, it's almost like when you come from that place of I am this, you are taking out the responsibility that you could show up another way. And
Mm,
when you are what you are, it's like you can't change something. So
hmm,
if you are something, you can't change who you are unless you see it from a different lens.
hmm.
And it's like the playing the victim mentality in that moment.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I was trying to say. I wasn't sure if I was getting to it or not.
Yeah.
I was. But yeah, that's exactly it right there, and that goes back to your your tweet or whatever it was, or your Instagram post. You know, judgment is the death of growth. And kind of diving into that a little bit more, I just got off a call with another coach
Hmm.
at a university. They're like ranked in the top 10 in bowling right now,
Oh wow.
and he was talking about meditation and how he's trying to teach his players meditation, but he has just himself started meditating, so he's not sure
Yeah.
if he's doing it right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because that's one thing I get from a lot of people. How do you meditate? Or I don't know if I'm meditating the right way. Do I just sit there? Do I breathe? Do I count my breaths? Do I listen to something?
Yeah.
What's the best way to start it? And he was completely judging himself on how he was
Uh,
doing, and then also judging like if it was the right or wrong way, or any of those things. And it's kind of funny, once we broke it down, we got to a point that he's just like, okay, I get it now. All I have to do is sit there and be quiet with myself and focus on something. That's what he
yeah.
simplified it down to. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's really it. But he was kind of like, am I doing it right or wrong? And it was funny telling him, dude, there's really no right or wrong way to meditate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like whatever you think
There's,
in your head is like a form of meditation, that kind of is exactly what you should do, probably.
yeah, it's so counterintuitive too to like what we've learned like growing up. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think meditating is one of the most valuable tools because it not only teaches you how to like just sit down and do absolutely nothing. That's like one of the things I teach my clients are like the ability to do absolutely nothing is a skill we could all benefit from. And not only that, but like when you meditate, you're teaching yourself how to just be with your thoughts. So I think of meditating like just letting go. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it. Like you're letting go. You're letting go of your thoughts, you're letting go of your identity, you're letting go of your emotions, and you're just being with what is. You're being with life.
Mm-hmm.
And
I also see meditating. I agree with you. I see meditating as that as well. Like you're just there with your thoughts, and you're just seeing them kind of
yeah,
pass by as if you were watching as if you were stuck at a train track and watching the train go in front of you. That's kind of how your thoughts are when you're
yeah,
meditating. You just want to see them go by. Uh, but also, I believe that meditating helps train your ability to focus
mm,
by when you focus on your breath, or you focus on counting your breaths, or you focus on a sound, or you focus on your body in contact with the ground, or your hands in contact with your knees, wherever it might be. When you focus on those things, you're training your ability to focus. And then a thought might pull you away and distract you. And then you have to refocus back on that intention.
mm,
So and that's what, in one of my definitions for success is not about your ability to focus. Success is about your ability to notice you're distracted and then refocus. So
mm,
success is more about focus refocus than it is just about focus. And when you meditate and you focus on your breath, you get pulled away by some thought, and then you bring yourself back to your breath, and then that's training your ability to refocus. Notice you're distracted and refocus. So that's
yeah,
another. And when it comes to performance psychology, I would say that that connects a little better with athletes than like anything else that I've really tried, because
I
they're
love
like,
that.
oh, okay, that's how I focus, you know, that's how
it
I
gives
train my focus.
it gives them something tangible or like something to like grasp onto, some
Mm-hmm.
sort of security. I love it though. It's like taking your mind to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was sitting at a Dr. Joe Dispenza week-long retreat, and we were meditating for, I mean, he had us in there for 4.5 hours. And during the meditation, he would just consistently talk about how like being able to bring your awareness back to whatever you said, your breath, like an anchor. He would talk about like the darkness behind your eyes, or the words he's speaking. Every time you bring yourself back into the present, and you can focus your awareness on anything, but when you train yourself with something concrete like your breath, you are repatterning in that moment, and you are reshaping your brain structures. And it's just
Hmm.
like going under a squat bar and squatting and getting strong legs. You're sitting down and you're training your mind, you're re-architecting your mind to focus. So and
To
what
focus on what you want to focus on instead of focus on what your brain wants to focus on,
yes,
which is a
yes.
little bit different. And I actually had on this other sports psych, his name's Reiner. His last name is incredibly German, I believe, and it's
Yeah.
hard. Like, I took German for 6 years. I don't even know how to say his last name. It's like Majerstein. But he actually talked about just what I just said. I mean, about the like, you focus on what you want to focus on instead of what your brain wants to focus on. And he's like, you are not your brain. And then he has this little keychain that has a brain on it, and he
Mhm.
gives this keychain to his athletes and says, sometimes you need to talk to your brain and tell it what to do instead of
Mm,
your brain talk to you. And I think meditation helps with that ability to talk to your brain instead of your brain telling you what to do,
I love that.
which also goes back to one of Will Smith's speeches. He talks about why you should run and read. I think this was at a Kids Choice Awards thing. He
Hmm.
won the Kids Choice Award, and his speech was all about running and reading. Have you heard this one before?
No, but it sounds fascinating.
So he got up there and he goes, two things you need to do to be successful in life. You need to run and you need to read. He goes, when you run, you learn to talk to that little voice inside of your head, that little voice that's telling you you can't, that little voice that is telling you that you're not good enough. And when you run, you learn to fight back against that little voice.
Mm,
And then when you read, there's not a person out there that has a new problem. Everybody has similar problems, and I guarantee you there's 7.69 billion people on this planet. Somebody has gone through what you are currently struggling with. So you need to read, because the more you read, the more ideas you'll get, and the more people you'll find that have gone through current struggles that you're having, the current struggles that you're having. You're going to find a way, find a solution to overcome that obstacle. So that's what he talks about, running and reading. And running can be a form of meditation, as you know, with all the running
yeah.
you've been doing lately. And I mean, I know it too, having run that 100 miler and whatnot. So running and reading and
I love
meditating.
it. Running, reading, and meditating. If you do those three things, you're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
But I think you hit it on the head. I mean, when in high school, I scored really poorly on my ACT, like really poorly, like 16. And I
Dude,
had a tutor.
that's not that good. I'm,
I had a
wait,
tutor for
wait a
five
second.
months.
Can I just ask you something real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe you'll get into this right now, but what what is one reason you think you did not score that high on it?
I thoroughly didn't enjoy reading when I first started, and I had a fixed mindset around reading.
Ah, okay.
And I had a tutor, and the tutor was supposed to teach me how to improve my score, and literally had her for 5 months. 5 months. I took the ACT 3 times. 3 times I scored a 16. It wasn't until I was 22 years old and I had back surgery that I had 7 months to just basically do nothing other than my choosing. I chose to read because I got sick and tired of listening to what society told me about how to fix my back, that I wanted to be able to understand how to live with what was going on. So I pretty much forced myself to read. And the interesting thing was I started reading books I was actually interested in. And I think that was the difference in getting me excited about reading. But it brings me back to like what Will Smith said, when we're gathering resources from the outside world and we're gathering thoughts and words and we're learning and we're putting those words in our mind, all of a sudden our world starts to shift because we're not thinking the same thoughts as we thought before. We now have access to new thoughts, almost like a new realm. And it's kind of like the more we read, the more we learn, the more insights we gather and integrate into our life, it grows our view of how we see the world. So that's that's pretty cool what that speech Will said.
Yeah,
It's so like
100%.
it's so simple too, and people can get it.
Hmm.
So
And so bringing this back to the beginning though, with meditation, meditation helps you just look at your brain and be like, I am not my brain, and I can choose what I want to do
yeah,
instead
yeah.
of my brain choosing for what I want to do. And you can train yourself to not be as reactionary, and you can train yourself to be rational and respond to situations instead of just letting your emotions take over.
Mm. So what are some of the benefits that your athletes have seen from meditating and integrating meditation into their craft?
The first thing that pops into my mind, and thank you for asking that question, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people don't initially see benefits right away. But
Hmm.
one of the biggest benefits that I hear consistently is that they're able to go home after practice or a game and leave the game with the game, or leave practice at practice and go home and be a son, or go home and be a husband, or go home and be a student or a boyfriend or whatever it might be. And they're able to sleep at night. Literally, I've heard guys talk about how they would go home and they'd be up till 2 or 3 in the morning ruminating over the game because they just had no way to kind of process it and get back to who they are, and get back to like rationally responding to the event. So that's probably the biggest one, is getting out of their athlete mode and or high performance mode. I mean, even a couple of the corporate people that I work with, they have a hard time going from the corporate life to the home life. And that even helps them at the end of the day shifting back into their their outside regular self, not instead of their work self.
Yeah,
What's one thing that you've seen?
I think. Well, first of all, that's super powerful to be able to leave your work at your work, because so often we identify with, like, especially as male, we identify with our purpose, and our purpose often becomes like who we are. But like, it's, if we can create that separation of, hey, work is work, it's something we're passionate about, it's something that we do, but it's not who we are. It gives us things to, like, go be present with your spouse or your family. It allows us to be more of a human being. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so often I saw it with the minor league guys, like they would bring their work home with them, or they would mask over it with drugs, alcohol, and it's a dangerous place to be in. And I think what I've seen the most when it comes to meditating in on-field performance are guys that they get lost in the moment, or if they don't, they now have a trigger like their breath to pull them back into the moment, to refocus on the glove, to refocus on whatever cue they use in the box or on the mound, and it allows them to be in the game. I mean, I remember when I was playing, my thoughts were completely elsewhere. I mean, like, where's the next party at? So being able to actually be in the moment, be in the game, that's where high performance is.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get true insights into the learning and pleasure, happiness, joy. Like, that's where you feel like mission driven, is when you're in that moment. So
That was interesting what you just said about being lost in the moment versus being in the moment. Because
Mm,
I think people say both of those things meaning the same thing
yeah,
sometimes. Like,
yeah.
and by lost, they could be like, oh man, I was just lost in the moment out there. I was so deep
Ah,
inside of the moment
ah.
that that's like I was playing so well, you know. But what you're saying is that they're lost as in like they don't know if like where they're even at. They're
Mm,
they're not there.
mm.
They're lost. They're not where their feet are, and
Yeah,
that's causing a poor performance.
let me rephrase that. So I said lost in the moment. I'm meaning a good thing, but you brought up a really good point. Like lost in the moment, it could be like a fearful place, which you were alluding to. But I was alluding to a positive of like
Oh,
being
okay.
lost. Yeah, yeah. But you brought up a good point because it's funny. Like we're talking about words and we're talking about how words create this image in our mind. And in your mind, I said lost. Lost is like has a certain connotation, and I can connect with like the feeling of being lost and the game just speeding up, right? But when we're in the present moment in a good way, like flow state, that's where we're at our highest performance.
100%. So, what do you think is the easiest way to get there?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. Um, I mean, the easiest way to get there is just to be where your feet are. um,
So, what's one way to do that?
I mean, I think focusing, learning how to focus, learning how to uh, create a trigger to get you lost, or I'm going to get rid of that word, but to be present.
Hmm. So, we talked about meditation. What's another way that you teach that ability?
Visualization. Take a hitter, for instance, having the visual of lining a ball up the middle. I think it's different for everyone, but an athlete that steps in a box that has a clear visual of what he's trying to accomplish, I think it unlocks what, like it teaches his subconscious exactly what he's trying to do or what he is working to do. Not trying, he's working to do.
So, going off of that, my one of my mentors, Greg Warburton, he used to work with Oregon State baseball for
Yeah.
a very long time, and from basically 2002 all the way up until last year. And he talks about how when guys are squaring up the ball a lot, but they're squaring it up right at people, he talks about how you should visualize not just squaring up a ball, but squaring up a ball into the gap, or squaring
Mm,
up a ball through the hole, or
mm,
squaring up a ball outside of the range of the infielders or outfielders. Because, like you just said, we're training our subconscious and we're training our brain. So when you're training yourself to hit a line drive into the gap and not just a line drive, you're a little bit more specific with it, you will be a little bit more successful.
mm.
So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? Because you just said something that kind of alluded to what he had told me in the past. And I looked at him and I said, that sounds like a little much. But what you just said, I think was exactly what he was saying.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't thought about like where like placement of where to hit it. Um, I don't know. That's a good that's a good response or a good question.
But at the same
Like,
time, it's like Mike Schmidt, one of the best home run hitters of all time. He talks about how he would visualize himself hitting the ball right off of the cap of the pitcher every single time. But he wound up putting that ball in the seats more than he wound up taking off the pitcher's head.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
or like
Game of
Barry
game of
Bonds.
errors, you know.
Yeah. But then again, this goes back to words and not being attached to words.
Yeah, I
And
think that's the big thing.
but like the words of him saying Barry Bonds, for instance, Barry Bonds' word is when he would hit, he would tell himself to swing down at the ball. right? Nowadays, everybody's talking about launch angle and getting through it and hitting it out front. But he was doing the same exact thing,
Hmm.
but he was telling himself swing down at the ball. That was his way of getting to that same outcome. So if Barry Bonds had a different hitting coach and he's like, oh no, you got to get it out front, get it out front, Barry Bonds would be like, man, like that's not what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like swing down at the ball, and his coach keeps telling him, no, that's not right. Now there's this conflict, but they're both saying the same thing,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Which is
Yeah.
so yeah.
Uh, That's a very important point, because so often as coaches we want to make a difference, and I've seen it in baseball. Like, whether we're strength and conditioning coaches or hitting coaches, pitching coaches, we feel the need to interject and say something. But oftentimes our voice, like, athletes don't hear our voice the way we think we said something. So it inhibits them. So I think we got to be really, really careful as coaches to give them that space, give them that freedom. Like, that's why I love what you say about asking questions. Ask more questions than giving answers.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that way,
ask them what they just heard you say, because
yeah.
when you ask them, okay, you go into something, you go into a topic, maybe it's about hitting, maybe it's about pitching, maybe it's about whatever sport they're
Hmm.
playing, and then you say, okay, what did you just hear me say? And they repeat it back to you in their own words. That's what they were thinking in their head. That's what they're visualizing in their head. So therefore, now it's up to you as a coach to catch their words and use those moving forward,
Mm,
and not be attached to your phrasing because it's your phrasing,
well
but
said.
now, like, it obviously, if they repeated back to you something, like maybe you used the word accountability, but then they used the word ownership. You should, when they repeated back to you what you just talked about, you were talking about accountability, and then they repeat back to you something along the same lines as accountability, but they say the word ownership instead. Now it's up to you to move forward with that word, because that's the word that they've connected to in their brain.
Mm,
So again, man, power of words.
mirroring, dude. I love it.
Hmm. So you took a whole Joe Dispenza week long retreat.
I did,
Where
yeah.
was that at? When was that?
That was Niagara Falls, New York, this last September. So September 2019. And the funny thing about it was we had won the championship that Sunday,
Who's
and
we?
Jackson General, so a double A team with the Diamondbacks. And the retreat started on Monday, so I ended up sleeping in the airport um, overnight, and then the following day just getting immersed into a week-long meditation retreat where, I mean, we were meditating for 10 hours a day, and just opened up just opened up a lot of awareness, a lot of insights, and what an incredible guy and experience.
What's the
Uh,
first insight that comes to mind?
oh man, the first insight, the essence of who we are is love.
Is that something
And
that you came up with during a meditation, or is that something that he was saying that
I
guided
mean,
you
I,
into that?
I mean, I think when we're able to get outside of our ego, so I think of the voice in our head. When we meditate so deeply that that voice in our head is no longer present, you're able to tap into something way deeper. And that was my experience, and I other people have shared similar insights.
So the essence of who we are is love. So how does that relate to overall performance in life?
All right, so I got the quote this time, the Einstein quote. So Einstein says the most important decision we can make is whether we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. So in a fearful universe or in a universe of love. And when we're in love, we're in creation. We're in our truth. We're creating. We're not fearful procrastination, stress, which creates separation from self, or excuse me, separation from others, whereas love is more all inclusive. So when you're meditating, you're learning how to connect not only better with yourself, but how to connect better with others, even though you're sitting by yourself.
Hmm. And so when you talk about the essence of who we are is love, that's in life, overall life performance, that's going to decrease stress, and it's going to help you be more productive, which overall leads to happiness, because when we're doing and we're not watching others do, we feel significant.
Mm,
And Dr. Wayne Dyer, I don't know, do you know who he is?
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
Dr. Wayne Dyer always used to talk about how every single person that he ever met with in counseling, what it came down to was that they all wanted to feel significant. Every person out there wants to feel significant in some fashion.
Mm, mm,
So it's up to you to figure out how that happens and what makes you feel the most significant. And that's obviously where purpose comes into play, and your mission driven life and everything like that.
yeah. Yeah.
But so that's, I think, what the essence of who we are is love. Like, that helps you get to that place where you're less stressed and you're productive and you're significant.
No doubt, man. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think I'm reading a book, The Way of the Superior Man. Have you heard of that one?
No.
It's David Deida, but he talks about masculine versus feminine energy, not
Mm-hmm.
male versus female, but literally energy. And masculine energy doesn't matter whether you're female or a male. You can be masculine driven, and the masculine energy is purpose driven, and it feels most connected with life and its core when we're on our mission. And the heart of being purpose driven is love. And now for the feminine, they feel most alive when they're in the flow of life, which is love itself. So they're more relationship driven. So they feel most connected with who they are through love in relationships. So they're not necessarily purpose driven, but you like think of like music when you got like a flowy music song on, like that is the feminine energy, which is super interesting. And it, once again, when we were talking about labels, but I think it allows us to like connect to what we are inside, like using words to connect internally.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So if I'm hearing you correctly, masculine energy is purpose driven
Mm-hmm,
through love, whereas feminine energy is relationship driven through love.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So love is what connects the two.
Yeah.
That's so when it comes to a person, do you, I mean, I'm guessing here, correct me if I'm wrong, like innately you're probably, or just like throughout life you've been taught a certain way, right? And these different experiences that you've had, you've either gathered a more feminine energy or a more masculine energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then so those that have a more feminine energy, should they seek out ways to build their masculine energy, or vis-a-vis, or how does that work?
Mm. I mean, I'm not a relationship counselor, but
Well, I mean, this isn't just
yeah,
relationships, I
no,
assume, right? Because
no,
it's
no,
more
you're
like
right.
purpose
You're
and
right.
relationships. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, purpose and relationships. So it's like if somebody is very relationship driven, but then they aren't as purpose driven, or how do they know if they're purpose driven or relationship driven?
yeah.
I don't know.
So, I
Maybe you
mean,
haven't read into it that much either, which is completely fine.
I just look at it like polarities. So you have good, bad, you have masculine, feminine, you have light, dark, and somewhere in the middle of balance is where we are most productive. So whether you are feminine, like you are deep in your feminine energy, like having that masculine energy somewhere as a source in your life whether it is through you, because there are plenty of females that are purpose driven, that are able to tap into their masculine energy, or being able to get it outside of yourself. So being in a relationship. Now, the danger with getting it outside of yourself is when, let's say, a breakup happens or a split happens, and the person isn't able to get that energy through themselves. Now, you might feel out of balance. So
So it's
I
always
just,
and that's one thing the Stoics talk about a lot is
yeah,
equanimity,
yeah,
finding balance, which is impossible to do. I mean, you can have, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think it's impossible or possible to find balance?
I think just glimpses. I think in glimpses we find it.
It's kind of like how I see it is like a grandfather clock, and
Mm-hmm.
it's swinging back and forth. What's that called? What's that thing that swings back and forth?
What is that? Pendulum?
Pendulum. Yeah, so it's the pendulum that's counting the seconds is swinging back and forth. It hits equanimity. It hits that balance point, right? But
Yeah,
then it immediately goes past it. So when you're talking about how we can catch glimpses, I've really liked how you just explained how those words you just used, because that is exactly how I see it. You can catch glimpses, but as soon as you hit it, it swings the other way. Then it's up to you to help it swing back the other way. Now,
yeah.
you can train yourself to not have as big of a pendulum swing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have these incredible swings, otherwise you're seen as a, like a neurotic or something. Like
Yeah, of
you're seen
course.
as crazy, but
Yeah,
you do want to calm it down, and but you're never going to find true balance.
yeah. I don't think so either. And I think the importance of like striving to find balance is almost like what the monks say. Like they train and they don't allow anything outside of them to, like, they don't react to it. It's almost like things happen the way they happen. So if we're driving in traffic and someone cuts us off, like we can have different responses with someone cutting us off. Like we could lose our cool and the next hour of the day is ruined, or we could just be like, oh, this person just cut me off. All right, cool. Just move on.
What do you
So
say when you stub your toe?
when I stub my toe,
This
uh,
is similar, I believe.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, it hurts like for 2 seconds, and then I just move on.
Yeah, that's
What
that's
about you?
that's.
What
I
about
was
you?
just talking about this the other day with somebody because we were talking about cutting off people getting cut off, and normally
Yeah,
when you get cut off, you're like, or most people, I would say, when they get cut off, oh my gosh, that guy's an asshole for cutting me off, But then you cut off somebody, and you're like, I didn't mean to, like, oh, I'm sorry, but
yeah,
they'll never know that. So
yeah,
it's if you get cut off and you're crazy about it for you know a few minutes or a few seconds, people will be like, oh, that's normal. Now if you get cut off and you're still thinking about that person cutting you off 3 days later, you're probably going to be seen as a little crazy. And if you're thinking about it 30 days later, they're probably going to ship you off to an insane asylum. It's the same
yeah,
thing with stubbing your toe. Like if you stub your toe and you're upset about it for a minute because it hurts and it's throbbing, people might see that as normal. Now if you're complaining about it for a week, then people are going to be like, dude, like you're a little crazy. But if you complain about it for a month, they're going to be like, okay, like you need to go get help. You need to see somebody because you're acting absolutely insane, even though your toe is completely fine right now.
um,
So, uh, yeah, I thought there was the same thing though. When like we can react to certain things or respond in a rational way.
yeah.
So,
There's a quote from Peter Crone. He's got, the degree that you are not okay with what is the degree of resistance you have to the moment.
mm,
So you can use that with any area in life. Is like in the moment, if we have a degree of resistance, that's the degree we haven't accepted what is.
I heard a quote similar to that one where it says something like tension is us not accepting ourselves, relaxation is who we actually are.
Mm,
Something along those lines. It's an old Buddhist saying, but I think that is very similar to the one you just said.
yeah.
Like the more we kind of wish something wasn't the way it is, the more we're fighting with ourselves. And going into the performance realm with anxiety, for instance. A lot of guys get anxiety, and instead of just leaning into the anxiety and leaning
Yeah.
into the moment and the energy that you feel around the moment, you're like, oh, I shouldn't feel anxious. So therefore you're fighting against what is, and therefore your performance goes down.
Mm,
Whereas if you just lean into it and you admit to yourself, oh man, like I'm pretty anxious right now, and then you lean into that feeling a little bit more, which is counterintuitive, you can actually move past it quicker. It's kind of like the bulls and the cows story. Have you ever heard that one?
no, I haven't.
So the bulls and the cows, I'll just tell this one real quick. In the the plains, the Great Plains of the U.S., when the storms, they would come over the mountains, and here in Colorado, it's incredibly prevalent, but the storms come over the mountains and down through the plains. Now, when they come over the mountains, the bulls and the cows are in the plains, and what the bulls do is they actually see the storm coming and they rush through the storm. So they face it head on, but they get through it a lot quicker. And
Mm,
there might be that initial pain, but they lean into it and then they get through the storm quicker. Whereas the cows see the storm and they start running away. But that storm eventually catches them, so they're in the storm anyways. And then on top of it, they're in it for a longer amount of time because they're now running with the storm. So be a bull, run run
that's a
into it,
great,
lean
great
into it.
analogy. Great analogy.
And I mean, that's, I think in the performance realm, that quote that you initially said, what was that one again? Can you repeat it?
Yeah, it's like to the degree that you don't accept the present moment is the degree that you don't, or is the degree of resistance that you have
Hmm.
to whatever it is. And
That's it right there.
anxiety is huge, man. Like people identify with having anxiety, and if it's something that you have, something you identify with, well, it's going to show up. And most people's reaction to anxiety is to fight it, is
Yeah,
to not accept it, and it's the wrong way to go.
yeah. There's this awesome mindset performance personal training coach that I speak with regularly. Her name's Amy Finella. She runs fueledfromwithin.com. And
Okay.
she talks about how you're not an anxious person, you're just experiencing moments of anxiety.
Mm,
That's what she says. I'm like, damn, that's good.
that's
At
really
least
good.
I think that's good. Like, because it's so true. You aren't an anxious person, or even if you think you are, like you're just experiencing a temporary moment of anxiety because it's not like that all the time.
Hmm.
So if there's a highlight or there's a bright spot that you focus on where you're not in that space, then you can grow that spot
Yeah.
and you can make it more prevalent in other areas of your life.
Yeah. There's a Eastern philosophy around that too. They say so freedom, like being free in your realm or in your craft is like a wonderful, beautiful place to be in, right? But if you want freedom, find where you're not free and go reach, like change yourself in those moments,
Hmm.
reframe those moments. So if you want freedom, find where you're not free.
And then go in there with a
Yeah.
mindset of where you were free.
Yeah, man. I mean, when we go in those moments, we have resistance, right?
Hmm.
Where is the resistance? Where does it come from? That's a deeper question. I mean,
Oh, so you go in and you examine
oh
that
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
ask yourself questions around it.
yeah. What are you focusing on? Where are your thoughts at? What are you feeling? Like, what are you
Hmm.
resisting? Like you brought it beautifully up. It's like lean into the resistance, lean into the sense of anxiety.
Yeah, that's
Like a
beautiful.
like a foam roller, you lean into a foam roller to loosen up some muscles, lean into some feelings to let yourself be free.
Hmm. And don't judge yourself for if you're good or bad or
No,
whatever. It just that is the way it is, and now make a change moving forward.
yeah, we all experience fear. We all experience levels of anxiety at times. It's
Mm.
about it's about being human.
Yeah.
But what's our relationship with it?
Mm. And that's where going like bringing this conversation full circle about like of the judgment of our relationship with it,
Mm-hmm.
and then making it how you want it to be instead of how you think it currently is.
Yeah,
All right, man. Well, thanks for being honest. I appreciate it. If
yeah, it was
people want to
awesome.
reach out to you, how should they find you?
Right now, best place to reach out to me is Michael.Locasto, Locasto on Instagram, or I am getting a website that will be up in about 2 months. So stay tuned, and
Gotcha. And
that will be up.
On Instagram it's Michael.Locasto.
Yes, yes,
Okay, cool. And then what
absolutely.
about the website?
The website will be up in about 2 months. If you connect with me on Instagram, it will it'll show up on there. But
Dope.
thanks for having me on, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
This
no
is
problem. What's your number one takeaway from our conversation?
present moment. Be in the present moment. That's where all the gold happens.
That's the gold.
What about
Awesome.
you?
Man, I love when people flip this question back on me. The number one thing that I initially thought of was leaning into whatever it is that you're feeling. Because also going back to what you said about the present moment, like when you lean into what is currently happening, you're even more absorbed in the moment. If you're leaning into it, if you're leaning into the moment,
Oh yeah,
so lean into what
deep
you're feeling.
deep into it, huh?
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for being on. So now, if you're listening, also, um, my number is 847-922-1371. Thanks for listening to the PASIC Performance Group podcast with Michael Locasto here. And yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, concerns. You want to break a topic down further. Again, my number is 847-922-1371. Or you can reach out to me at my email, which is tyler@pasicperformancegroup.com. Talk to you soon.